Good evening. I'm Carolyn Clark, and I really can't believe I'm sitting here in front of a screen speaking to the congregation we love. It's the result of a response to a very brief email from Bill saying casually, "Hi Carolyn, I'm putting together 2 evenings of reflections on our faith journeys based on a parish retreat coming up soon. The gatherings will be on Zoom." I have to admit the Zoom reference was the hook. I thought, I can do that. There's no way I could stand up at a forum and share my journey as Ann Stewart did so eloquently 2 years ago. But I'm also plagued by that scripture that reminds us not to keep our light under a bushel. It's really hard to know just where to start, but risking sharing the biggest news first, my life was totally changed forever at a marriage enrichment retreat in Chicago back in 1975. When that occurred, it caused me to look back and try to figure out whether God had been drawing me to Him all along. My first memory of any discipleship was my maternal grandmother on her rare visits to our home from hers in southern Missouri. Such a simple, loving gesture, but I still remember her sitting, brushing her hair, 5-year-old me on the bed, and grandmother singing to me, "Jesus loves me," and "Jesus wants me for a sunbeam." I followed that example in 2012 when I visited a hospitalized granddaughter in Portland, Oregon. She was very resistant to any physical contact, but miraculously allowed me to sing these childish hymns and a foot massage in that agonizing time for her and the family. As I reflect on what I call stepping stones leading me to Christ, I remember a special evening in Webster Grove, St. Louis, Missouri, where Ralph and I spent our early years of marriage from 1963 to 1972. We participated in a couples dinner group at the neighborhood Presbyterian church. After a guest speaker and dinner at the church, we would adjourn to a member's home for wine and cheese. The program that night was given by Bill and Sue Banks, a Webster couple our age in our church. Bill had been near death with a hopeless case of cancer. Sue fervently traveled all over the country to healing ministries, and in some cases was even able to take Bill with her. Their story that evening told us of his miraculous cure. Doctors in his hospital ward baffled that his depleted blood cells were suddenly normal. I was so awestruck by their story that evening that I followed her through my house, hanging on her every word. Unfortunately, I was convinced that to have that kind of a faith experience, you would have to be willing to cast everything overboard and be willing to head off to Africa as a missionary or a nun. I had never heard anyone give a personal testimony before. 3 IBM moves later, and a near sabbatical from church attendance, we landed in an active and vital Presbyterian church in Winnetka, Illinois. We joined a small house church or koinonia group for fellowship and study. Only a short 2 months later, an ecumenical group called Christian Laymen of Chicago was promoting a marriage enrichment retreat. Most of our group of 4 couples thought it sounded great. I was reluctant because I wasn't into retreats, and I thought, why rock the boat? Of course, in the end, we all signed on. The first evening of the weekend began with the usual non-threatening icebreaker questions. The last question we were to answer on a slip of paper. What did I hope to receive from the weekend? Why was I there? I hadn't really given it a thought. I was there because our group was there. For some reason, I put down I wanted more joy in my life. And Ralph had put the very same word in his response as well. Jesus knows every desire of our heart and has a perfect plan for us. He answers our prayers, even though we know not how to pray. The weekend ended in a chapel with all gathered around a communion table. Facing each other, we couples read a contemporary abbreviated litany, confession, and affirmation of faith. Then, on approaching the table, we knelt, broke off a piece of bread, and dipped it in the wine, placing it in the mouth of our partner. At that moment, tears started flooding down my face. I didn't make a sound, but I could not stop crying. Finally, I regained my composure, and we made it back to our seats. I had no idea what had happened to me. A couple of days later, Ralph, running late, asked me to drop him off at the commuter bridge, where he ran down the steps to catch the train into Chicago. As I pulled away, I could see the patrol lights flashing me over. The policeman walked over to my car and proceeded to viciously attack me verbally. Didn't I know I wasn't supposed to park on the bridge? And what in the world was I doing? And so on. After getting the ticket and the tongue lashing, I drove the short distance home, walked into my kitchen, and said, I wonder what happened to that poor man that he would be so angry and rude to me this morning. I opened my eyes as though a stranger was talking to me in my own kitchen and in my own head. And in fact, it was a stranger. I knew those would never have been my thoughts or my words after such an attack, but the living Lord, the Holy Spirit, who had found me just 2 days before in the Eucharist. I had had the blessing of receiving Christ in the broken bread. So that was the beginning of my walk, begun in community, found in community. And now I retreated. I'd never read the Bible, had never attended any church groups for study, and certainly not prayer until our small koinonia group. That had always been reserved in my mind for churchy people or other people, even though we did attend church fairly regularly. Now I was filled with an overwhelming sense of love and joy, a tremendous hunger for study, and confusion about this newly discovered world that had been right there under my nose. I've heard it said, a person doesn't know they don't know until they know. Or another describes the phenomena as when you're asleep, you don't know you're asleep until you wake up. I began reading everything I could get my hands on and was amazed to see how lively the scriptures were and how pertinent they were to my daily life. But even though I was reading the writings of many contemporary Christians, as well as those of the saints, I had this mistaken idea that what I knew was only for a privileged few, including me, of course. When Ralph was offered a promotion to the East Coast, requiring a transfer, I was afraid I couldn't be a Christian in some other place. My image of God was too small. My Christian community was too small. And of course, God knew this, and so he moved us on. During this period of about 2 to 3 years, I attended some Bible studies, and we were drawn into an Episcopal church where a young seminarian was leading Sunday forums based on the writings of C.S. Lewis. We were also missing the close fellowship of our Chicago small group. At the same time, we met another couple who had been drawn to the church, but who also had a hunger for deeper fellowship within the body. We spent some time planning for a group to meet every other week for teaching, fellowship, and prayer. It was such an unlikely idea, but the generous rector was willing to let us give it a try. This Christian community was very different from our previous group of only 8. This Friday fellowship was an ever-changing body whose members ranged from 20 to 45 people. It became a vehicle to nurture those who came, expand our vision of our Lord, as our speakers came from many different denominations. The group began to become a family, care about each other, and pray for each other. Sounds wonderful? Well, it was, but there were certainly difficulties. In a wonderful book called The Joyful Christian, C.S. Lewis gives a reading on what a visit to a fully Christian society would be like. He says, and I quote, "Each of us would like some bits of it, but I'm afraid very few of us would like the whole thing. That is just what one would expect if Christianity is the total plan for the human machine. We have all departed from that total plan in different ways, and each of us wants to make out that his own modification of the original plan is the plan itself. You will find this again and again about anything that is really Christian. Everyone is attracted by bits of it and wants to pick out those bits and leave the rest." End quote. So life in community is also a constant reminder to me that alone my vision of Christ is much too small. There are parts of the gospel I can accept quite naturally, but when I feel uncomfortable with something or someone, rather than criticize the action or reject the person, I must acknowledge this is probably the very point where Jesus is calling me into a deeper relationship with him. Living our days as if the cast of characters and situations has been designed just for us can be quite exciting and challenging. We think we have chosen our peers, but for a Christian, there are, strictly speaking, no chances. Christ says, "You have not chosen one another." Christ says, "You have not chosen one another, but I have chosen you for one another." The friendship is not a reward for our good taste. It is the instrument by which God reveals to each the beauty of all the others. So, as I reflect on what the Christian community has meant in my life, it has been the vehicle for continuing a personal relationship with Jesus Christ. The community has also provided me with a reference point. It has been a constant reminder that this was never intended to be a journey made alone. Alone with my books and in my prayer closet, I can only stand still. Our reference point is Jesus, who never moves away from us. Jesus, who is the same yesterday, today, and tomorrow, whose teachings and parables happen over and over again in our Christian communities. So we are told, for this we are called together into the body to learn forgiveness and to learn love. Finally, as I reflect on the next steps of my journey, I would like to share part of a friend's note to me. None of us know what the future holds, but we all know ultimately who holds the future. Thank you so much for this time together.
Well, my road to Emmaus, about where I've been and the bumps in the road and the road ahead, have been quite bumpy and quite a twisty road. But last Sunday, the collect of the day really caught my attention as being a good indicator of the road ahead. And it said, "Be gracious to all who have gone astray from your ways, and bring them again with penitent hearts and steadfast faith to embrace and hold fast the unchangeable truth of your word." Well, that sort of seemed to me that that was what this was all about, so I guess it must have been the right week. For me to understand my walk, it's easier to look back and see what the road looked like, to see the path, and to see the things that did not make much sense at the time, and to see how they might have fit together, which looking ahead is probably hard because you only see the space that you're on the path at the time. But in this case, I need to start at the end. During my journey, I've had a lot of rectors who have become very good friends and helpers and advisors on the road, and anchors, I guess I would say, to make sure the road was still somewhere close by. Sometimes when I'm most confused and wondering if things were going right, I think God really does send a signal about where you are and how you are doing to keep me grounded. So this story concerns the search for our new rector. The class of vestry that just got off is the class that went from the beginning for them of the end of a rector to the end for them and the beginning of a rector. So we went through the whole shooting match. And Ellen and I had become very good soul mates of sorts. So when she announced that she was leaving on the first vestry meeting that I went to, needless to say, it was a surprise. And she sensed that I was having a difficult time. And so she took me aside one time and said to me, listen, you have to have the faith that God already knows who the rector is. It's just that he hasn't or she hasn't been introduced to you yet. So you just have to trust that God will do his work. And so for 2 years, I guess, I drifted in and out of that thought. And when we finally got down to interviewing the candidates, one night I was sitting at dinner with a candidate, and we were discussing our backgrounds kind of thing. And I got to the point where, I started to say, well, I was a marine biologist. And he looked at me and he said, oh, at Woods Hole. And I said, yes. And he said, and didn't you study bluefin tuna? And at that point, my jaw was on the table. And he then looked at me and he said, I have to admit that I read your bio for the Faith Walk talk that you gave last year during the Sunday forums. Well, at that point, I could feel God tapping me on the shoulder, reminding me of what Ellen had said, and recognizing that I had just met the rector that God intended for St. Michael's. And it was the most wonderful feeling of another confirmation from God, like others that I've had along the way, but it's the most recent one. So that's starting at the end. But going back to the beginning, for me, I think it started in Sunday school because I really had a lot of fun in Sunday school, and so it was kind of a memorable thing. Certainly at that point, I didn't realize it was a path, but it started out. It started out good. Then we moved from Connecticut to Indiana. And I should say that in Connecticut and I was baptized in the Congregational Church. We moved to Indiana and we became Presbyterians because that was the church that people recommended when we got there. And that experience, when I was a freshman in high school, was a really great experience because they had a really strong youth group, and it was just lots of fun to be involved with that youth group. Still not seeing a path, but at the end of 4 years, the Presbyterian Church had a youth Sunday where the youth group ran the whole service. And so in divvying up different responsibilities, yours truly got asked to do the sermon. And that was a little nerve-wracking, but it was, it turned out to be fun putting it all together and giving it. And after I gave it, lots of people came up and confirmed that it had been well accepted. So I started being enthusiastic about what I had done, and you sort of wonder about your careers at the point you're a senior in high school, and I wondered, wow, was this something that was of interest? Well, here's the time when one of those rector friends brought me back to earth and said, it's a whole different thing than you think just as a result of this one experience. So just be confident and stay working on what you want to do when you get in college. So I did that. Now, college was one of those bumps in the road because let's say, even though it was a Methodist college, that I rarely crossed the threshold of the Methodist Church. So I was clearly off on a detour at the time. And then when I went to work on my marine biology career, it still was not on my agenda. But when I met my first wife, she was a cradle Episcopalian. So when we were going to get married, I saw the light and became an Episcopalian, being trained by a priest that was related to my wife because he was married to one of her cousins. So everybody knew the guy, and he was really, really friendly. And so we were married. Then we started out on our career. And once again, it was one of those tap you on the shoulder moments, because when our son was born, it became obvious that we wanted him to go to Sunday school. So we went to the local Episcopal church where we were living, and they had a really good Sunday school program. So we enrolled him in Sunday school, and we started becoming much more involved in the Episcopal church, and we were really having a good time. The next thing after Jeremy is that some really good friends in the church started talking to me about a program called Crescio, and it was a 3-day walk with Christ that everybody was saying was a really good experience. However, I was not a first-time taker, but they were persistent. So I went on a Crescio weekend, and the experience of Crescio for me was really life-changing. I finally realized there was a path, and that I was on it, and it was really great to learn how to realize when you're in the valley and when you're up on top of the hill. And as they explained, the good thing about the valley is there's only one way to go. So when you realize you're in the valley, then that's sort of the time when you get one of those taps on the shoulder for encouragement to go up the hill. So I got really involved with Crescio for a long time, and it's still something that makes a connection with a lot of Episcopalians, as it turns out. The biggest bump in the road at that point was the passing away of my first wife, and a 15-year-old son that I had not much of a clue as to how we were going to proceed. But the night after I had heard from the hospital that she passed away, on that morning, I was sitting on the couch in the living room, having not had much sleep, and thinking about things and whatever, and all of a sudden, clear as a bell, I felt somebody touch me and say, "Trust me, it's going to be all right." And to prove to you that it's going to be all right, I'm sending down some rain to water her gardens. And lo and behold, it started raining. So, having gone through all of the Crescio stuff, that was a confirmation for me that things were going to be all right. Not that there weren't going to be more bumps, but that things were going to be all right. So we got after this experience, and the people around me, especially people from Crescio, holding me up, I was able to keep going. And after a period of time, I realized that this nice lady in church, whose name was Daphne, seemed very interesting. So I asked her out. Well, here's one of the bumps because she turned me down flatly. So fortunately, there was some persistence in the process, and we were at a party at a yacht club in the local area that we both belong to, and again, fortunately, there were matchmakers in the crowd, and so one of them came up to me and said, "You know, Daphne just bought a new grill that needs to be put together. She got it in pieces. Why don't you go see if she needs some help?" So I went over and talked to her, and we decided that I would help her. So we went to her house and started putting the grill together and started getting to know each other. And after the grill was done, we have the picture of the baby between the two parents. And the grill brought us together. And there's another one of those God incidences where something happens and you just know that you're on the path and you're in the right place. I think that was one of the great valley to mountain experiences. And I've learned that whenever I get down in the valley, one of the symbols of Cursillo is a rainbow. And so to see the rainbow, you have to look up. And I realize every time I get down in the valley that if I just look up and find the rainbow, things will get better. So the end is coming to Florida. We had good friends that go to the same church that we did in New York, and they came down to Florida for 3 months every year and said to us, "Why don't you come down?" So we decided to come down for a month, and since we went to the same church up north, they suggested that we come to the church they go to down here. They said it was a really, really fun church. So we went to church, and as we were going out the door at the end of the service, you know, you stop and talk to the rector, who seemed like a really nice gal. And we're, you know, talking about where we're from and all that kind of stuff. And she said, "Well, I was born in New Bedford, Massachusetts." And I said, "New Bedford?" And she said, "Yes." And she said, "In the New Bedford Hospital." And I said, "No, my son was born in that hospital." So there's God saying, two connected to each other. And from there on, our life at St. Michael has been a confirmation that that there is and was a path, and I'm still on it. Now, the road ahead is probably filled with a lot of bumps, but having made it through the bumps that brought me here. I have faith that I will make it through. Two big bumps that I just should mention at the end. When I was 12 years old, I became a diabetic. And at that age, it's very complicated. But given some really good people, doctors and my mother, I came out of that valley with a lot of confidence that it was just another thing. And it's been just another thing for 63 years. And the second one is when my first wife and I lost our first child. Another wrenching experience. But we had, again, good friends, and then Jeremy came along. And so you always, I guess what I've learned is when you hit the bumps and you get down, there's always a way. Man, you may not realize who's doing the leading, but there's a great program on the in Crescio that's called Footprints, and it's an explanation of how you're walking with Jesus on the beach and two footprints all of a sudden become one, and people say, "Oh, where did you go?" And Jesus says to them, "Well, I've been carrying you the whole way, and here I am being carried the whole way." Thank you.